All right, welcome. This is a relatively casual gathering. I have no idea if we'll stay 5 or if we'll be a whole lot more, but we'll be recording as well. So then folks can get some questions answered a bit later also about the pattern. So welcome. If you want to maybe share in the chat where you're from. Some of you I already know where you're from. Barbara's in, I think, is it North or South Carolina? It's North, right? Oh, you're on mute though.
I mean, yes, North, although I'm in New Jersey right now, but
yeah, true. And Julie's in the Chicago area.
Hello.
Oh, Jody, I'm going to be in Santa Fe in about a week and a half. I'm so excited to visit there. Nancy's in Virginia. Oh, you're in Chicago right now. That's awesome.
Visiting our daughter for March birthdays.
Oh, how nice. It's so nice to be able to visit for birthdays again.
The weather's not very nice though, unfortunately.
I know. It's snowing here in Milwaukee. I imagine it's something similar in Chicago.
At the moment, just overcast, but a lot of rain is predicted over the next several days. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
we had crazy rain in New Jersey. My Airbnb flooded. I mean, not really badly, but there was water inside.
Did you get a new place to stay, or you were just?
No, we just, the owner came and cleaned it up. There was just like a little water came into the bathroom, into the kitchen. So it was kind of, it was fine. But yeah. I think it was more distressing to her than it was to me.
I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. They were that present though.
Yeah.
Well, we were just in New York together, but now I'm back home in Milwaukee and I'm babysitting for my little niece Pug. So we've got an extra party over here. So we can self-guide a lot of things. And I've been very curious if there are specific questions that folks would like to ask about the pattern or a prompt. It could be fun just if you've got something in progress, whether you're at the particular step for this week or you're somewhere else, to be able to talk through and brainstorm that spot. We can hopefully hold your quilt up or do a screen share of it and talk through. So being that we're a nice intimate group right now, if maybe everyone wants to think of a question that they've got in mind, and then we can see if there's some overlap on those questions. Hello, I'm glad you guys are just joining us. Vicki, it's nice to see you. Hi, Angie. I just asked everyone to perhaps type in a question if they've got something that they're curious about, whether it's specific to their quilt or in general, if they want to hold their quilt up while we discuss. Something to get things brewing conversationally. So I want to make sure that we address the things that you guys are curious about. Well, Angie, that's a good question. I'll start there. I am working on a new pattern. I've been doing a lot of sewing on it this month, and I'm going to be launching it in July. So I thought it was going to be August, but it's actually going to be July, which is pretty exciting. This is probably the most time I've ever had to plan a pattern and do it real thoughtfully. So I've made 2 quilt tops already for the new pattern as I'm kind of tweaking it and adjusting it. And I'm hoping to get at least one of them quilted before the pattern launches as well. So that's very exciting on my end, secret project that I've been working on that is where my stitching has been going to lately. Yes, Angie, there will be a Quilt-Along. It's a daily practice quilt top. So there are prompts for something small to do every day for 30 days. And hopefully each prompt will take about 15 minutes. So a lot of them are not quite as laborious as some of the scavenger hunt prompts. And then at the end of that time, you'll have a quilt top. So then you'll be able to hand quilt it or machine quilt it, however you would like at the end. And the theme is something that I've just been genuinely very excited about lately, which is the idea of a diary quilt or storytelling. So that idea of writing or adding to the quilt top every day felt really appropriate to the idea of a diary or storytelling about what's going on with you. So there's some fun different techniques that haven't been in previous quilts. It is quite a lot like the scavenger hunt quilt in the sense that it starts with a one base fabric and then you're appliquing and adding things to the surface of it. So it's not a vignette style patchwork. It's similar to this one with a whole cloth base. And it's very affordable also. I paired up with somebody's secret, and it's going to be a really great way to present the pattern. Okay, so other questions. Jilly says, I'm in danger of overthinking the manifestation prompt. Can you offer any advice? Jilly, that is a wonderful question. And that's kind of right where we're at in the Quilt-Along right now as well. My first one came to me really like it was very obvious that what I wanted was to manifest another person to share my life with, and felt really straightforward. And so then 3 months later, when I kind of had that, I was dating someone who I liked a lot and we're still together now. I felt pretty confused about what, I don't need to be so greedy. I already got the thing that I wanted. What else could I be trying to manifest? But then I looked a little closer and I realized I was having a lot of frustration with my health at the time. And there were a lot of things that I wanted. And then that felt really hard to figure out how to phrase in the positive, because I was so focused on what I didn't want. That was really unpleasant about my health at the time. So then I just settled on the idea that I wrote the words, I'm in a vibrant state of good health, which, when you take that step back, I overwhelmingly am, and was even at that time. I had something going on that wasn't good, but I was still incredibly able-bodied. And there were moments where I could look back on in life where I was in a worse state of health than I was at that time, which was helpful for me to be able to remember. And then I also thought about how I was going to try to make that change, which I felt like I needed to lower my cortisol levels, and that would be a really helpful way to improve my health. So I also included the phrase of be gentle with yourself. I had been in a state of trying so hard all the time to manifest and work on and do things and make changes. And so it's kind of funny that what I really needed to do to get what I wanted was to relax a little bit. So having that in the manifestation block was helpful for me in terms of actually letting someone else essentially be in charge of things getting better for me, rather than me working hard to manifest something. It felt like a good idea, especially with the quilt having worked so well for me recently. What am I going to maybe stop trying so hard for? I'll put it in the quilt and see if maybe that will help resolve things instead. But Julia, I wonder if you want to unmute and share it all about where you're at with the manifestation block, or if any of that is helpful for insight about two very different ways that I went about it.
Sure, that is really helpful. Thank you, Heidi. I like the idea of you sort of taking something, you know, like your health that needs working on and improving in that way. I've been thinking along the lines of, what do you really want, you know? But actually this is something kind of quite simple, and I can relate to that. So yeah. I mean, I've seen there's some lovely examples of people putting words. Did you put words on your actual words on your pieces for this? Or?
I didn't put any words on the first
Right.
one. I did an embroidery of holding hands. Essentially, it was very fast to do. And then the second one, I did a backstitch embroidery of those two words. And I also included this embroidery. Oh, let me spotlight myself so you can see that a little larger. Yeah, so this is the embroidery that I did, and I did these plants as well. My my night person block was looking a lot like a planet, and I'm a longtime big fan of the Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So I embroidered these plants and things literally from the drawings in the book. And then I embroidered, I am in a state of vibrant good health, and be gentle with yourself. And I think partly I added the embroidery because it felt a little too loud. Sometimes adding words, it feels like our brains are just hardwired to go immediately and directly to the words. So I think I quilted it in this darker color to help push the words back a little bit. I think maybe even with that being the thing that I wanted to manifest, like it felt hard to spotlight it so much. So I tried to make it more subtle in the quilt. I know for sure the holding hands is very subtle in the quilt. I'll spotlight that one again too, just for contrast. So it's here, and you probably still can't see it yet. But this is an arm here, and that's an arm, and then these are the hands holding. And it's just with a running stitch rather than a back stitch. And so it's white thread on yellow. I liked how it fit with the larger scope of the quilt though, because it looks a lot like my arm coming from my body.
It does, yeah.
And then these rabbit ears kind of look like legs. And you know, you guys all have the patterns, so you know that I was a little bit like, I went back and I rearranged my charger cord because it was looking a little too phallic. That's kind of like right in the right place for those legs too. So that one did look a lot more subtle with the white thread. It's not any less in the quilt though. But I think for me, with it being words and being done in more of a indigo navy blue color, it felt like I need to soften that, which I think sometimes that's very easy to happen with desires. Like I think actually I had a lot of conversations with my therapist about like wanting things and trying to pretend I didn't want them. And I'm sure part of the quilt and just dealing with, I said what I wanted and now people can see that I want that. And what does that mean? Like, I'm sure that was part of the powerful healing medicine that quilt had for me, was like learning to say, I want something and have people know that. So it's interesting how some of that subconscious business, Beth, you're like nodding, you totally get that. You can unmute and add too if you want. But yeah, you know, and I think Julie, health is something that we're all aging all the time. It's a very easy go-to. Like if we want to be healthy as we get older. I was just with the New York Quilt Guild, or upstate, the Northern Star Quilt Guild, the last few days. And one of the people that I was with there was just sharing about the supplements that she's taking to age well. And she's been practicing brushing her teeth with her non-dominant hand as a brain teaser. And, you know, just like having that goal and vision of being mentally and physically capable as you get older. I know a lot of the people in my family have lost their mental capacity before they lost their physical capacity, and that's been a real challenge. And so just saying, like, I want to be healthy as I age, I think is a huge thing to want to manifest. You won't know if you got it 3 months from now, but they don't all have to be like, I want it now, and then I'll find out that I have it now. They can be really interesting, different shapes.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Heidi.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for that wonderful question. Okay, Barbara asked, maybe it's a bit premature, but I'd love to talk about the next step, quilting. Oh, I think that's a wonderful thing to talk about. That would be a great one to maybe screen share or hold up your quilt, or I could find it on Instagram and hold it up and talk about that. We just have two more. So let me
just post it on Instagram.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So either you could screen share or I could. I'm going to just read these next two as well, just to paste and see if they overlap. So Julie is curious about how many people this is the second time with the scavenger hunt pattern and how you might be adjusting the pattern this time around. I am curious about that too. And that would be wonderful to have folks share about. And then Angie said that she loves the applique and found this quilt to move along very fast. Yeah, so I find it to be a really fun way to do a quilt along and a pattern. So I'm glad you're excited that new pattern that I'm working on for July is the same applique idea. All right, Barbara, have you found your quilt that we can look at to talk about quilting?
I am working on it. Hang on.
Okay. So we got a few new people, and right, Rachel, it's wonderful to see you. Caitlin, hello. We're using the chat where, especially if everyone posts one question that they're most curious about, I think we'll have plenty of time to get to everybody. So think about what you might like to ask. And you know, already we've had lots of really different kinds of questions that are directed to me, and also like Julie's question is directed to our larger community. So give that a whirl.
All right, I've got it pulled up.
Okay, cool. You should have permission already to screen share.
Let's see. Of course, I have like 7
arrived later. This is
windows
now
open.
she's here too.
Did that work?
Yes, we can see it really well. Thank you. Okay, and so Barbara, your question is about quilting.
Yeah, just sort of like thinking about thinking through a little how to quilt now that everything's on there.
The pieces that are over your dress, is that your manifestation block?
It is.
Oh, cool. Would you be willing to share about that one with us?
Sure. So those are what I was feeling was missing. People I've talked to about the block, I noticed a lot of them included their families in the birth block, and that didn't feel like the right thing to do. But I realized by the time I got to the end that my immediate family felt like they were missing from the quilt. So those are some fabrics that for me are representative of my husband and my kids. And I played around and putting them different places and decided near my heart was a good spot. So that's where they landed.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And I like the visual balance with the, or I don't know, but if balance is the right word, with the chronology.
I agree. You also have kind of a nice big open space in terms of the focus concept of the quilting, where you wouldn't just quilt the same exact way everywhere. So that is kind of a nice low-hanging fruit to be able to think about where might that focused area be, or where might the quilting be more complex. That doesn't mean, though, that you have to start quilting there. You could easily begin quilting somewhere else and then just allow it to become more dense there, or a different direction. Or you could potentially quilt the whole quilt and then go back with overlapping lines of quilting there at the end. So it could be not like an afterthought, because you'd be planning to do it, but it could
like
be
twice quilted or something.
Yeah. Yeah, you could be crossing streams or going in again, so long as you're leaving your knots exposed for that. You wouldn't be able to go back and bury your knots there necessarily.
I love an exposed knot, so that's
Me too. So especially if I'm trying to create an area of focus where things look more complex, you get a real focal point with that extra pop of color from the knot there.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I've definitely been thinking about how it sort of happened that I have this big, because at first I started seeing if I could put I'm pointing, obviously you cannot see what I'm pointing to. If I put the manifestation block in that empty space, right, with that, but somehow that empty space wanted to stay empty.
You could
And
point
so I
with
feel
your
like it's sort of like a
mouse, I
challenge
think.
and an opportunity.
If you wanted to point with your mouse.
Well, just I tried these in a couple different ways. Like, so I kind of laid them along the pleat. And I used your strategy you mentioned, I think, in the scrap quilt class, of taking pictures of it in different ways and looking at them. And this, anyway, this was what felt right. So, but I'm like, wow, there is really a big empty space. So, I'm trying to view it as an opportunity. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I really like the overlapping, having them touch each other, and the visual balance that it creates with both the chronological block and all of your relatively small items that you touch every day being on the right. When I was much more strategic with the quilting on my first version of the quilt rather than the second version. The first one, the quilting began in my heart center, and it just rippled and expanded out from there. So that would be, it was in the top left corner with really dense quilting, about 1/4 of an inch gap between rows in a green color. And then once it left my heart space, it became red and an inch gap instead of 1/4 of an inch gap. So, especially just with you putting that manifestation area close to your heart, that does make me think a little bit about accentuating the manifestation block. Because usually that one is so powerful and you've just done that step. So it can be nice to have the quilting amplify or reference that manifestation step in some way. And I guess in a way, my second quilt, the quilting did that too, but it worked to help hide what I wanted, which led to, other good work of realizing that that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, it could be interesting to think about emphasizing or adding to those family members. I could see even doing some quilting that echoes those shapes, but almost like a cartoon cloud.
I actually had thought that same thing, that I wondered if I wanted to sort of like also to sort of make them feel more, because I tried them overlapping and I didn't like that so much, that I kind of piled up.
Yeah.
But I did then think about like kind of bunching them together. I mean, quilting around them to make them feel more like one group.
Yeah. I'm also, as we're saying that out loud, I'm thinking a little bit about Margaret Stanford's quilt, which
Mhm.
was amazing to get to see that in person in New York. And part of how she added to the leaves in her quilt was by not quilting on the leaves. So it
Mhm.
left them looking like a really big focal point because they didn't have those dense stitches. And she quilted hers a quarter of an inch or maybe even tighter, just really dense hand quilting.
So
Which,
quilting around them, but
Mhm.
maybe not through them.
But I'm also thinking that maybe your focal point area, you could choose some additional spaces to go around.
Mhm.
So like the way that you're treating those pieces of applique that are representing your family over your body, maybe in that area that you want to be the focal point, that negative space in the middle, maybe you could choose some additional shapes to quilt around and leave unquilted.
Mhm.
Or maybe even to, as you quilt, put some trapunto or something.
Mhm.
And that could be interesting. And maybe even think about some wider circle things, like your immediate family is important to you, but I'm sure there's like the quilting community and other causes, other groups or spaces that you might want to potentially even think about, just to have in mind as you applique. Oh, I like that idea a lot lately, that maybe you could make a focal point by doing less work instead of by doing more work.
But that negatives, when you have a lot of um dense quilting, the unquilted spaces are really emphasized.
Yeah, it's a huge focal point. So that could be, I think that could be a really neat thing to potentially go in and do. And also you'd have some time to think on what you want to do. If you start by doing that cloud around the family member area, like you've got at least 4 hours of quilting.
Right. It'll be a while before I get over to the
Yeah, you've got some time to let that percolate and think about what kind of shape you might want to leave as a negative shape.
Well, and even I hadn't really thought about it. There's a little bit of kind of a cloud shape to the pleat I made.
Mm-hmm.
That it sort of has that similar sort of scallopy.
Mm-hmm. And you're clearly a morning person, and it's right where the sun should be at peak brightness. So that kind of adds to a cloud feeling too. I wonder if even the quilting might be like a series of clouds rather than one cloud expanding all the way out from
clouds
from the left side, but maybe multiple clouds of quilting.
Oh my goodness, Heidi, you've given me so much to think about.
Good. I'm so glad. The quilting is my favorite part of making a quilt. I certainly love piecing too, but the quilting is totally my favorite. So you're in for a really good time.
I'm very excited now.
Good.
Turns out quilting is so exciting.
Yes. Cool. Thank you. All right. Well,
thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you for sharing so much about your quilt with us.
Stop the share. So.
All right. And so I'm going to head back to, oh, good. And we've got a couple more good questions coming in as well. And hopefully everyone read in the description that we're aiming to spend 2 hours together. So I'm feeling still really good about our ability to get to all these questions and be real thoughtful with them. So Julie's question is connecting to a lot more people than just me. So let's all, we're mostly here visually. So if Lucy and Lee want to do in the chat, but otherwise maybe just with your hand, how many of you are on your second scavenger hunt quilt? So 1 finger for you're working on your first, 2 fingers for, if anyone's making a third, I would like to know. You will have beat me for the third. Okay. Oh my goodness, Julie, you're the only one.
The only one, so okay. We can move on then.
Well, I mean, I guess that leads me to a question for you though, because I obviously have made 2 and I found it to be a very, very interesting process of making the second one, that there's that tension of what did I did the first time? How can I respond in a different way? So I'm really excited to hear from you. And I'm sure everyone else here has only made 1. So they're probably eager to find out what's it like to make 2. So could you share a little bit about how it's felt different for you this time around?
Sure. So first of all, like that was my first real quilt and I absolutely love it. And it's completely personal, of course, which is part of why I probably love it so much. But this time around, I feel like even though the pattern itself, like for the first one, was a complete reflection on where am I headed. But this, and it's still, of course, all the same prompts. But I guess I'm trying to be more present with this one and focus on, I don't know, picking like my favorite fabrics, or which I didn't really do. I think I took the pattern much more literally last time. And so I appreciate that you gave us all these opportunities. Like, you don't have to really follow it like this time around. So I'm way behind, but I didn't take a picture yet, but here.
Okay, great.
Is where I'm at.
Let me hold it up. I'm going to spotlight.
And so it's completely different. I didn't trace my body. I decided to do, okay, let's see.
Ooh. Oh yeah, with your leg.
Yeah, so I only have the 2, but I wanted to do, I kind of wanted to do tree pose, but I couldn't figure that out from an applique standpoint. So I thought, okay, I want grounding, and so I'll just do kind of one leg. That's where that came from. And I don't know, just in general, I'm really excited. I'm a little, you know, like how you love something so much the first time, like how could you possibly replicate that sort of feeling? But I'm going for it. And I don't know, I'm definitely going to also do something about my health for the manifestation. And I don't know, like I already have my circle picked out, and I pretty much know. It was kind of interesting for the 5 things, what's changed. Well, I don't know if anyone wants to look up my old quilt. I mean, my first one, I had my old kitty in it, and he's not with me anymore. So right off the bat, but now I have 2 sort of nightmares that I've adopted that are keeping me young. So I'm going to put those in, and you know, I have my rings that I still wear every day, but I don't like wear. I mean, I obviously my wedding ring, but like I put the 4 in last time. I'm thinking maybe I'll just do my wedding ring this time, and I don't know. Haven't gotten really to think about the other steps as much, but
I'm, you know, looking at you and just seeing so many plants.
Oh yeah,
you, that
my whole living room.
Yeah, that feels like it would be a very interesting way to go for that, the plant or animal prompt. The plant that you have, I have that same plant here at my home, and that's why it's shown up in several of my quilt, even like my new pattern that I'm working on for July, it's in that one also. And
well, I've had to get rid of all my plants with my cats, my new kittens, because they're eating everything.
Well, so clearly you haven't gotten rid of all of them.
Well, I haven't, but I've hit it. I mean, I've tried to get up as high as possible. So they don't seem to like the rosemary, and that's for them. So we'll see. Anyway, so that's where I'm at.
Oh, well, thank you very much for sharing with us about your experience with the second version. And that leg is amazing. And Barbara added that to the conversation.
Oh, thank you. I'm not reading the chat. Have fun, everyone. First time around. Brilliant.
Okay, so where were we? That was Julie. Yeah, and Lisa, I've got Penelope is with me, and this is my first time babysitting her again since she got real sick when I was babysitting her last time in September. Now she's had heart surgery and she's doing better, and she's just like, I love this dog so much. It's my brother's dog, so that's why she's my niece, Penelope. Okay. So Angie wrote, I was curious with the travel step, why you suggested using a bright colored thread for pleating when the thread color will be on the back of the quilt and not really show. It makes sense for the pin tuck, but I'm confused for the pleating. Yeah, good question. So I find that, and I suppose I implied that you would continue using a thicker thread like the DMC Pearl size 8 or a crochet cotton. And I find that the color shines through quite a lot in the pleat, even though it is not a pin tuck. The pin tuck, of course, does show quite a lot. So let me go spotlight here. So this one, so you might be able to see that it's like a navy blue thread color that I used. They do stand out in quite a nice way. Trying to think what I have here. This isn't a pin tuck, but this is a framed quilt that I made. And the frame is attached with like a red orange kind of a color. And you can see those stitches pulling a bit. Let's see if I've got a real good pull. This is a quilt as you go technique. So technically there's no top stitching at all, but I think you can see that I only used black thread to piece it. And you can see the thread a lot. And so for me, one of the main compasses, internal compasses that I have to know that I've made like a Heidi Parks quilt is highlighting my hand and making that visible. So using the high contrast color, especially when you just see those little tiny nips of color in it, is a way for me of still seeing my hand, even though it's in a subtle or a soft way. So that's why I suggested a dark color, so you could see it. Angie, does that, oh wait, now I've gotten confused about where I was. Yeah, Angie, does that answer some of that question about the travel step? Yeah, okay. And then this, my other travel piece was very subtle. So here it's a pin tuck that I did in red, the 606 DMC Pearl red orange, my very favorite color. So that of course stands out real well, but I just find there's such a kind of magic with the pleating of not quite knowing how you did it, because you assume it's two pieces of fabric pieced together, and then it would be a very challenging piecing job. So when it's pleating, it feels kind of magic that you can see it. Okay, Caitlin has asked, perhaps we could talk about different approaches to composition. I find myself feeling shy or non-committal about placing the different elements of the quilt and then overwhelmed by the possibilities. I would love to hear you, and oh yeah, and then you asked that, which we did. So Caitlin, let me show the pattern for a minute. I'll do a little screen share. Okay, so here in the pattern, you know, I have some of these process photos from the first one that I did. And this, I think, especially is a good view that I was clearly thinking about a lot of the different prompts at the same time before I committed to them. In particular, the first time I made the quilt. The second time I made the quilt was for the Quilt-Along. So I sort of challenged myself to just think about one prompt at a time. But this one, I had to piece the quilt pretty quickly, and And so here you can even see I've only just pinned my body block, and I'm already laying things out and trying to decide what works and which color to commit to. These are all the fabrics I was thinking about for my bowl as I was laying things out. And here I've committed just to the first two. So, and it's funny, out of all of these, I chose this grid. Oh, you know why I chose that is because the bowl was a bowl that my dad made, and he wore plaid shirts most of the time. So I bet it was kind of a nod to him, and he was also kind of a night person. But here was me trying out a different one. So you can get kind of, the Quilt-Along encourages people to do things one step at a time, but the pattern itself has a lot more freedom to do things in whatever order that you would want to. Caitlin, do you want to maybe unmute and just share a little bit about what you were specifically encountering that was a challenge that way?
I mean, honestly, I think it's, I'm happy to, I have my quilt right here and I'm happy to hold it up, but I think also it's just like a mindset thing, where it's like in the face of so many different possibilities, even when you're laying it out and testing it, like, how do you develop that gut instinct that's like, yes, that's the one. And then a follow-up question, I guess, that I had after hearing you, answer Angie's question, because I think these two things are related. You're talking about those internal compasses that you develop to say, like, all right, this is a Heidi Parks quilt. It seems to me like in some ways that's, not a shortcut, because I'm sure it took you a long time to arrive there, but it's a way in the moment when you're composing or when you're making artistic choices to say, all right, like, this is the choice for me, even though, here are these like 5 other possibilities. So I think, it's less about like, oh, how do I compose my specific quilt? And like, how do I like, block out like the noise of all of these other choices to focus in.
Oh yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. I find that a lot of times once I have an idea for a quilt and I've like gotten myself rolling on it, it feels almost like it will make itself. Like all of the decisions seem quite clear and obvious if I think about what is my goal, or how did I get started? What is the piece about? What question am I trying to answer? And, and also just kind of general goals that I have. Like I like to show that I'm capable of being precise, but I also like to allow things to happen. So for me, I'm always trying to find a balance between those two. And one of the ways that I found that out about myself actually was this piece that I have over my shoulder. This is an embroidery that I was doing a lot of these right before I found quilts. So this was in like 2012 or 2013. And it's inspired by Meissen pottery. So this really precise slip cast pottery from, I don't know, 1800s. And just everything was very careful and very precise. And when I'm not being careful, I certainly lean that way. And I found that I kept making all these things that were very precise and just so. But then when I would go to the art museum or scroll through Instagram, the things I was attracted to were much more loose. And like, it was a real challenge to try to find a balance between what I liked and what I was making. So,
that really resonates.
Yeah. And so like doing the quilting at the time was a newer medium for me. I'd been embroidering for a long time and it just felt so, I was a high school art teacher. I did this project with my students and some of the students made the most wonderful, loose, free. I had this student who, A+ on every single project she ever did. And she had this photo of her little sister who was looking really grumpy and grouchy. And she had all these knots, like her hair was just this tangle of knots and mess, but like in the best craftsmanship way, not in a Yeah, she wasn't a student who didn't care, who half-assed the project. She was just able to make it look like a grumpy 3-year-old.
Awesome.
And it was so good. And I think I had this muscle memory routine with embroidery where I was always being very careful. And so for me, shifting to a different textile medium of quilting, I think helped me be a little more raw and rough. And also just trying to rewire, maybe it even connects to that idea with the body manifestation of wanting to look like everything's all together when it's not, and trying to find a truer representation of what things are like, or trying to balance more the time I have to make something with what the finished product looks like. So now for me, there's this happy place in the middle. And I think part of it is just switching the things that would be careful versus not. You know, in the quilt world, so frequently you're not supposed to have knots on the top of a quilt. You're not supposed to have your stitches be visible. You're not supposed to do certain things. So I break some of those real obvious rules, but I think I also have really tight, careful craftsmanship. But because it's not in the place where you would expect it to be, it has that feeling of being my quilt, where you can walk through a show and you can recognize, like, oh, that's probably Heidi's. So it was more like, you know, being able to find a place to be myself and be really tidy and careful, but to not have it, you know, like to have my work be more the piece that would attract me in a show.
Yes, totally. I get what you're saying. For sure.
Because it was just so funny. I kept making all these things that did not make my heart sing the way that other types of styles did. So that I think is helpful in composition. Now I kind of try to apply that to other parts of my life. Like I think about the times where a quilt makes itself and I just know how to do it. And so now how can I apply that to my business model? Or how can I apply that to like the way that me and my sweetheart engage with each other? Or how can I, you know, like even while I'm watching this puppy for a week, like how can we be in sync with each other and have it work out the way that a quilt works out? But to get to that point with a quilt, I think it's really like doing a lot of looking and seeing what is it that you're attracted to, what really makes your heart sing as you know, like when I first got started quilting, especially, I would like Google the word quilt. And it was just mind-boggling to me that I wanted to leave my job to be a quilter. And I would Google the word quilt, and like nothing that came up on that first Google search page excited me. You know, like not the way that if I really hunted and found my people with quilts, yes, I knew I wanted to be a quilter. Like on my Pinterest page of quilts, I was all in, but not if I just Googled the word. And so there's like really watching what is it that makes your heart sing that way. Like maybe even making your own Pinterest page of quilts could be a helpful way of like, oh, that's what Caitlin's really into as a quilter.
Yeah.
And, you know, some things might overlap with me, but other things won't. And then that's where you really feel like you've got your own voice and composition style starting to come through. Like I think about my friend Amanda Nadig, who, you know, I taught her quilting and now she's just off to the races and has her own thing going on. And like she overlaps stuff a lot more than I do. And I think that's a really neat moment of how I know that's her quilt, because I could look at 10 quilts in the room and I could not knowing, like I think a stranger could come in and figure out which ones are Amanda's and which ones are Heidi's. And it's those subtle little things that you routinely do, like overlapping versus not. And color choices. I think she has a really distinctive set of colors that she chooses and works with. And and she likes thrift shopping more than I do. I get kind of sensory overwhelm when I'm there and I don't really want to do it. So, so I'll let people drop things off at my house for free, and then I'll drop the excess off at Goodwill, but I just don't get the same joy that she does of sifting through things. And then our quilts look really different because we were starting with such different fabrics. So anyway, yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, thanks. That was really helpful.
Cool. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay.
Heidi and Caitlin, if I could just also add something Heidi said to me that was really helpful, was also not just looking at other quilts, but just making a bunch of things and seeing what happens, and seeing what you do. And also seeing what you like that you did, and also what you didn't like so much that you did. But that I think about Heidi, you saying once, like, this is not the last quilt you'll make.
Yeah.
And so, like, I like the idea of viewing every quilt as sort of learning more about how you like to quilt.
Totally.
Thank you for bringing that up, Barbara. That actually makes me want to show something else real quick. This is my gallery page on my website. And I think part of why I felt such an urgency to change careers and quilt was that I knew I wasn't going to make very many quilts if I was teaching full time. And I remember the whole first year that I was a quilter, and there are a couple quilts that I made that aren't here on my, so this is not the first quilt that I ever made. There are a few other ones. I probably should add them to the gallery page, and carve out some time to do that. But I remember just that whole first year in or maybe first 2 years, 2013 through 2015, I was all the time just asking myself, what does a Heidi Parks quilt look like? And I think by the time I got to the 2016, I had a much clearer answer, having made these quilts. During this time, I was very much a monotasker. So I had to make a quilt start to finish and find out what it looked like. And that information was really helpful for me in deciding, well, what's the next thing that I'm going to make? So especially a lot of these were very inspired by just by other things that I saw that I liked. This, I was never able to find the name of the artist who made it, but I went to Expo Chicago, which is happening now in Chicago. I'm hoping to go either Saturday or Sunday to see it. There's a series of drawings and collages that had kind of a similar look to the different color palette, different subjects, but just the idea of like a little circle here and then a little cluster there, being in that sort of a grid of many pieces that appealed to me. And I thought, well, that could work with my life. I could prep a little square like this, and then during cafeteria duty at school, I could sew the applique down. So I find that for me to also be a real, especially Caitlin, the part of your question that is, when I could do 1,000 things, how do I choose which one to do? The limitations of my lifestyle are very helpful to me. So if I need something to be small to fit in a tote bag to go to work with me, like, wow, does that solve a lot of problems? Suddenly then I could only do 100 things instead of 1,000. It's so helpful. And then here, this one, I was thinking a lot about improvisation. And so I liked that it looked like a classic quilt way of piecing at first, but here you can see the piecing of it. It's actually improvisationally pieced, and none of the squares are made the same way. There's these long strips and small grids, and just a lot of complexity in how it's pieced. And I felt like, okay, that's part of who I am. I'm not going to make a quilt that looks that's all the same square over and over again. It was very eye-opening quilt. This one, I was looking, I had a weekly routine of driving along Lakeshore Drive in Chicago while I was living there. And it was amazing to me how different it looked every day. And I liked that a lot. This is the first time I put a curve. It's not even that curvy of a quilt, but this was the first time I figured out a curve. And I remember being on the phone with my friend Kat, and she was kind of like coaching me, like, yeah, you just like cut it to match and you sew it together, you get a curve. And this one is the first time that I did the pleating technique, actually, which is so important in this quilt top. And so this is where I first had the idea, because I had I'd hand dyed a lot of these fabrics. The blues were RIT dyes. Some of the tans were coffee or other things. But I had used this big swath of the RIT dyed fabric, but then I wanted it to look different. So here I pieced these very tiny pieces of that fabric to each other to break it up. So it would at a distance look the same, but then up close look different and more complicated. And at first I was cutting tiny little pieces of fabric, and then I thought, this is kind of silly. I could just be folding and sewing and get a grid kind of, so it's still a strip quilt, but the pieces within the strip are just folded. And that felt like a really eye-opening idea, that it could be folded. And then here, you can't see it very well right there, but I didn't have a big enough piece of fabric. And also I had made this little pickle for myself that I didn't quite know how to deal with. So I had to have a seam here. And then I thought, well, if there's a seam there, it won't look like such a mistake if there are other vertical lines here. But again, I thought, why bother cutting and piecing? All I want is the texture of the lines so that this doesn't look like such a big mistake. So then I folded the fabric to get the crease. And I think I did that again here. Yeah, you can see that. You guys can see that, right? In this one, sorry, I can't zoom in more than that. So these vertical lines, they were very dense. Every two inches or so, I put in a pleat, and that texture felt right to me. And that was such a big moment of who is Heidi Parks as a quilter. And that was in the summer 2014, when I found that I didn't need a different color field. I just wanted a reward for the viewer getting close, to see that it's more complicated than you thought it was at first. Oh, here you go. Now you can really see that pleating on this in progress part. And so that really happens just when you make multiple quilts. You know, here I saw that the jelly roll strip quilt was a thing, and I was curious to try my own. And I was also looking a lot at the Gee's Bend quilt books at the time. I was very, very inspired by those. And so I think there was a much more complicated quilt that I saw. Oh my goodness, Penelope's really snoring a lot. So there was a quilt that was much more complicated. And I guess that's one of the moments where it was like, oh, I don't yet know how to make things look not like this quilt got accidentally much more tidy and straight lined than I wanted it to be. And so then that's part of why I made this one next, is this was definitely not quite as tidy. This one was really deeply inspired by a Gee's Bend quilt, but you know, then I did something that was very me in it as well. I used my mom's tablecloth, and I pieced all these white scraps of tablecloth to each other. And like, that is so similar to the white scrap quilts that I've been making lately. Oh, I can't, sometimes it's funny which photos I put on here and not put on here. But here you can see, you know, piecing the same white fabric to itself. It was a tablecloth that had a lot of eyelets in it, and I didn't want it to show through the batting. So I was trying to strategically cut the pieces that didn't have holes in them. But this, it just has so much in common with this quilt. This one is much more me, but this quilt is how I got there and learned as I'm trying to make a copy of a Gee's Bend quilt, something else is happening here too. And that something else is me. You know, and then like this one still feels just so strongly like me. And here it is right in between, you know, this is another Gee's Bend inspired quilt. But then this one is really me, this night flight quilt, and it has lots of pleating in it again. And it's a very abstract, simplified view of something that I can see out in the world, looking out the window of an airplane as I'm flying and seeing the lights there. So, yeah, Barbara, thank you for adding that detail about it. It takes making a lot of quilts to find out who you are as a quilter. And I think you're trying to not get slowed down by the indecision of how do I make 10 quilts in my mind and then have this one quilt turn out just right. I would say try to make the 10 quilts by being fast. I would say even when I was answering Barbara's question about quilting, I was saying like, you've got a solid 4 hours before you have to make that next decision. So start quilting the part that we know we like, and then trust that quilting is so wonderfully slow. You'll have time to make the next decision while you're working on piecing that next part. Most of them I don't, you know, that's what keeps me genuinely excited while I'm working, is the curiosity of what's going to happen next. And if I create a problem for myself by piecing my birthday block in a particular place, then that again is kind of wonderful because it narrows down the options of what I get to do for the next thing instead of having infinity choices. All right, up next. Angie shared that she did her quilt top and loved it, and you've already incorporated it into another quilt that you're working. Oh, can we see the other quilt, Angie?
Yeah, once I was so hesitant about doing the pleating, and so when I did it as a pen tech, then I was only an inch in, and I'm like, oh my God, I love this. And so my son does some really interesting artwork, and I printed one of his drawings onto fabric, and I did the pen tech on this
showing
piece.
really well. Normally black is a little hard to see, but yeah, we can really see that pen tuck.
Yeah, so and this was all one piece, and I cut the end off and turned it at a different angle, so that but yeah, I love the heavy thread, and I rarely use quilting cotton. I'm not even sure what this is, some kind of like home decor fabric. It's really thin. I use silk a lot, and shears. So I used, like, as soon as I finished my quilt, I was like, oh, I have to do that again. Yeah. And I like being able to just kind of pinch it and get those curves in. And so that was kind of fun. So yeah,
it's so satisfying to get a curve so easily, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're used to curves being like so complicated.
Yeah. And so my plan now is I want to do a whole quilt of nothing but pen techs.
Oh, yay. Make sure you tag me and send it, and that I get to see it.
Yeah. So
I'm about halfway through I guess my second quilt top that is only pen tucks or only pleating.
Yeah.
It's very satisfying. I'll be really excited to see what you do with that. Thank you.
Yeah. And kind of going with that whole idea about just if you've got the 10 quilts in your head, just do them. You can work small and just crank stuff out. If you've got an idea for something, it's like, oh, well, if I just do it small, I can finish that in a few days. And it's like, and move on to the next thing. And so, yeah, because I even did my scavenger hunt quilt. It's about 26 inches square instead of the recommended size.
Yeah.
I went smaller.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, that I think is a big part of why I liked that 36 square grid as well. Why that appealed to me was, let me make 36 10-inch quilts and then sew them together, like all answering the same question.
Yeah.
And in the scavenger hunt quilt pattern, the prompts at the end are, what if you just chose one thing? And so you're kind of making another scavenger hunt quilt with that prompt, Angie, with the idea of make one with just the traveling block.
Yeah.
And I feel really tempted to make one that's just the chronological block, or also just the body block. I think would be amazing to do that.
Right. And I think it's fun, especially being on Instagram, really looking at those things that you're drawn to and asking the question of why.
Yeah.
What is it about that that's really pulling me in? And so it's like my mind just went blank. He's the guy in Europe, just does a lot of bizarre polka dots.
Oh, Russell.
Yes, Russell.
Yeah, Russell Barrett.
I've been very drawn to the circles a lot. And I'm like, those are really pulling at me. So that's why I did circles for my chronological thing instead of squares. And, you know, it's like, okay, well, and then watching the last soft belk and harvesting the denim thread. So the color of the denim thread was exactly what I wanted to do a lot of my quilting. So I harvested a lot of my thread and used that for part of my quilt. And so it's like taking different aspects and just really going, okay, what is it that's drawing me to that? Or it's Irene Broderick. She does, her stuff is like so complex. My brain sort of just short circuits looking at it. But I just bought her new book and it's the teeny tiny skinny curved lines that she gets in there that just suck me in. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have her book because I just want to look at those little skinny lines. And so I think it's really, you know, working small so you can do a lot of different things and try stuff out and find out. Because sometimes I find that, oh, that looks really fun. I want to do that. And then you do it and you're like, oh my God, I hate this. And then other stuff like this Pentec thing, I almost didn't do it because I'm like, oh, that's going to change the edge of my quilt size too much. And I hate squaring up a quilt. I don't want to do it. And so I watched your video and you said how little fabric it actually takes up. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. And then I end up loving it. So yeah, so it's a lot of trial and error.
I think it does a lot of that very skinny line thing that Irene's work does too. That kind of skinny, slim thing. Yeah. I think also, you know, the framed quilts class that I just recently did live that's available on demand, like that's what I was teaching in New York recently too, was framed quilts. And I think part of why I love them so much is that you can get a whole new idea out so quickly and find a new color palette. And that's where I got to see Barbara recently. You were in that quilt in that class. And I think that's, you know, part of why you and I were talking so recently about it's not the only one you'll ever make. And especially since you can make one in just a couple hours instead of the many hours that a quilt requires.
Right. And I also think, like the other day I was in a sewing circle, you know, sit and sew on the Nook. And we were talking about, I was like, oh, well, I finished my quilting on this quilt, so now I have to bind it. I hate making bias tape. I hate it. And one of the girls said, well, have you looked at the stuff with people doing a lot of facing their quilts? And I was like, you know, that reminds me, I just saw that. So I went on YouTube, I looked it up, and I was like, oh my God, the answer to all my prayers. And I was able to get like the whole thing done in a couple of hours. And I'm like, wow, it's like totally done now. And I didn't have to agonize over the whole bias tape thing. And I got to do, I love the little hand stitching it all on, but I don't want to make bias tape. So now
I
I've got
zero
a new way.
desire to make bias tape.
Hate it, hate it. So,
Absolutely.
so now I have
none.
that. So I have a lot of new things in this quilt that I learned and incorporated and tried that now I'm like, okay, now I'll take that and move it forward into something else. And probably most all my quilts in the future will all be faced. But so it was very fun to do. And I love being able to try the different sizes of threads, not just the different colors, because you get a completely different texture when you're using the thinner thread in some part and a thicker thread in another part. So yeah, so it was very fun.
Oh, and that's such a great little nugget too of that personal preference of you enjoying using multiple thicknesses of thread and the results that you get with that. Like, you know, thread choice, I think, is just so intimate, and it's how you show your hand and the color that you choose and the thickness and everything is very, very interesting and can have such a cool impact on your work. Okay, so I see a comment from Jody. When I quilt, I usually start from the center and work out, but in this one, I wanted to start in the orbit block. I noticed that you began one of yours from the edge. Does that mess up the rest of the quilt when you start that way? I like the idea of different quilting throughout the quilt and letting it be more intuitive as well, but I am concerned about bunching or puckering. That is a very good thing to be concerned about, Jody. So I tend to always try to choose one fixed place to start quilting, and then I quilt ever outward from there. So in my scavenger hunt quilt, I started quilting in the corner and I quilted out from the corner. You can also start from the center or the midline of a quilt and quilt outward from it. You could start quilting at the bottom of a quilt and just quilt all the way up from there. What I wouldn't do is start quilting in the top right corner and then start quilting in the bottom left corner and then just hope that they meet up. Because usually that, I think, would create a bit of a jog or a pucker or a shift. One thing that's helpful for giving yourself a little bit more freedom to maybe quilt in one place and then like 10 inches away, do some more quilting and then have those two parts meet up, is something that in the clothing construction world is called creating ease, where if you start quilting from one area and you're always smoothing it to that next place, it can create a wrinkle or a buckle. But creating ease in clothing, like if I start sewing the top of my shoulder and I want to get down to my armpit, but one is a little bigger than the other, if I try to evenly distribute that half-inch problem the whole time that I'm sewing it, then it doesn't create such an obvious problem. That creates ease where it still can lay smooth and not look like a problem. I think it's really easy when you're quilting to just try to match things up just so from one edge. And that's where then you can get into that kind of a pickle where things don't meet properly. So the better you are at creating that ease, the more you can get away with in terms of space between where you start quilting and then where you go from there. Any other questions in that department, Jody? Okay. Cool, we're all caught up. So we have a few people who I know haven't asked questions yet. I know we didn't hear from Rachel or Vicky. I don't think we heard from Lisa. How's it going? What do you guys want to know? And make sure you unmute.
Heidi, I was just wondering about how to quilt mine, but I don't know how to share a photo of it. So could you pull it up on Instagram?
Absolutely.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Vicky, remind me what your Instagram is.
It's Vicky Ehlers.
Got it. Okay. And this is the most recent photo, right?
So my
wow, you spent so much thoughtful time embroidering.
I know, I just went overboard, and I'm thinking I should have made the words smaller, but I didn't. But
oh, I love it. You know,
something
it fills the space so beautifully.
that's my manifestation. I've just
Mhm.
said those words since I was a kid, and then it kind of morphs into a prayer that I ask for health and happiness for myself and those that I love. So I just put the beginning words on.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking for quilting it though, I'm kind of thinking of going in between the words
Uh-huh.
and radiating out from the circle
Okay.
and in that part. And then for my chronological blocks, I'm just thinking of kind of making my quilting swoosh up like they swoosh up. But I'm wondering, would I put my quilting right through those squares to them, or would I avoid those? I don't know.
Where the chronological squares?
Yes, I guess I'd have to go
Sure.
with those.
Yeah, I typically quilt over those. When I'm working with text and embroidery, a big thing that I try to think about is the over and the under of my stitch. For example, I don't want to go over an L and make it look like I've crossed it into a letter T. So I can
Right.
just kind of scooch the stitches in my needle one way or the other to strategically make sure I have an understitch when I'm going through a letter. I also find that a lot of times you can feel like your stitches should look like every inch, right? If you're doing a gap, but there's kind of a thoughtfulness, a paying attention to nudging just a little lower or a little higher to not cut through the text in a way that I think can look really pretty and satisfying, and like, oh, it was quilted by someone who was really trying to be thoughtful about the quilt top. So, if you were, for example, gonna quilt and your quilting line was gonna go right on top of the H, like that line, you could just nudge it a hair lower so that you're next to, rather than quilting right on top of your stitch for such a long time.
I'm thinking about going straight down in between the lines of text.
Oh, like I can kind of faintly see these lines. You
Like
would quilt on those
raise
lines?
the sun.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking more like concentric circles around, but yeah, that would be wonderful going
I
through.
think it'll just be less busy that way.
Uh-huh.
But then swooshing from my birthday block, swooshing up through the chronological blocks and around. So those would almost, those would be almost perpendicular to the rays coming from the circle.
Like it would kind of curve like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be very fun. You might find they're going to be close together here, and then the further out you get, the farther apart they would be. So you might want to add in between this line and this line, you might want to add like one or even more extra lines,
Okay,
just to
Yeah.
have the density increase as you extend out from there.
hmm,
Yeah, I think you should definitely be able to quilt over those if that appeals to you. We were also talking before with Barbara, though, how it can be fun to not quilt over everything equally. That
right,
Margaret Stanford, for example, has a beautiful scavenger hunt that she made 2 years ago where she didn't quilt over the leaves, and it
Mhm.
actually made it look like there were more leaves in a plant on the quilt because of the lack of quilting.
mm-hmm,
So that could be an interesting thing to consider, like maybe even where the eyeglasses are, like maybe you don't quilt over the glass part of the glasses, or
right, mm-hmm,
I would say probably your most neutral part of the quilt is here on your birthday block.
right.
So would it be interesting to have an area where you quilt less there to create a shape or something?
Mm-hmm.
Would be, I think you also are very clearly creating an area of focus or a focal point by having everything radiate out from here.
Mm-hmm.
So that could certainly like satisfy that prompt with having an area of focus being on the circle as well.
What color would you suggest I use?
Oh, good question. I wouldn't want to confuse the text so much, so I probably would not quilt with the yellow variegated that you used for the text.
Mm-hmm. I basically used black pearl cotton for my running stitches and all of my patching of the applique.
So it'd be nice to not do black as well then, because then the piecing blurs a lot with the
Mhm.
quilting. It could be fun to do, just thinking about things radiating out, like that magic of nighttime. So what if you did a navy blue or a indigo blue, like the color of your sweater that you have on right now?
Mm-hmm.
That I think that would be a nice contrasting color, and your stitches would show up really well against the light gray and against the yellow on your body.
And do you think I should pretty much use that same color for the whole thing then?
Oh, that's entirely up to you. You certainly could, if you,
Yeah.
you seem to like to commit to a color once you start with it, with the black and then with the yellow. So I think it could be nice to have just 3 thread colors in the quilt.
I think I'm going to add a border to it too to make it a little bigger because
Mm.
so personal. It's not really going to hang on the wall or anything. It will just basically be a lap quilt for me. So
Uh-huh.
I'm going to, just add a little more to make it a little bigger.
That there have been a few people doing that. I think my friend Kat Gelder is doing that with hers right now, that she started 2 years ago, and she's back at it now.
Well, thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Vicki. It's wonderful to see you and talk through the quilting together. Yeah, anyone else want to share or ask something? It could be a question to other people or a question to me, or just if we haven't gotten to hear your voice yet, I'd love to hear your voice.
Well, I'll just share. I'm learning so much from you all. I really appreciate that. This is my first quilt ever. I am a avid knitter, but I've always wanted to quilt. I've been, fascinated with quilts for years. And I so appreciate like this is just so liberating, and I feel like I can experiment. I love this thought about this is just your first quilt, not your only quilt, so it's fine to live and learn. So I just want to share appreciation for this whole process. I'm at the very beginning of all of this, but I'm just in terms of the scavenger hunt, I'm just finishing chronology, but I've got some of the other pieces kind of underway and ready to apply. I'm a little intimidated by the actual quilting piece of it. So I'm glad we've talked about that a little bit today. So just sending some appreciation to you all for teaching me many things.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love working with beginners. I feel like those are my people. Hey, Rachel.
Well, my question really was kind of the same as Caitlin's, like, because I respond to like Cy Twombly and Joan Mitchell, and how would I do a quilt like so abstract? I mean, obviously the quilting probably could be like with knots but piecing, like I don't even know where to go with that. So that's kind of like the same thing that she was saying, like, you know, how do I make a Rachel quilt?
I've made quilts inspired by both of those artists. See if that's easy for me to pull back up. Oh, okay. Well, oh my God, where I had that open. So in Chicago from Joan Mitchell, we have City Landscape. And so I just blatantly used the same title and everything. Are you familiar with that quilt from her?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so City Landscape. So this painting, which is at the Art Institute of Chicago, is the one that inspired this. The way there's this kind of concentration at eye level, and clearly the colors are different, and the medium, of course, is. But this painting, I was looking at it in person at the art museum, and then I went home and I made this quilt. It was also inspired partly by Mark Bradford. Let me pull him up. By him in general, but there was a very particular blue painting of his. We'll add in the word blue. Talk about someone who's made so many works of art. This one. So this piece, just the horizontal quality that it had, and the landscape. So I was looking at that one and Joan Mitchell, and then this is the quilt that I came up with that felt connected to that. And then Cy Twombly, this series of mine, I know the clouds are there. Sorry, I know the stars are there beyond the clouds. This for me was very inspired by Cy Twombly, both with all of the white sculptures that he does and like just the pencil sketching. So especially for those who aren't familiar with him. Yeah, that's a perfect one right there. So like this kind of work for me was very, very informative for this quilt. And like this one was 11 feet wide. It's really big quilt. There's a lot in common. There's also a whole lot that's different. I didn't make it an identical one, but for me, there was a lot that I took from both of those artists. And yeah, so I love the idea of you thinking about a particular artist or artwork and then trying to see how that might infuse for yourself. And it's always so interesting, the specifics of when you look at sized work, what is it that you want to pull from it? It might be a very different aspect from the aspect that I pulled from it. Something that I also try to do to it helps me make it my own more is I'll give Cy Twombly's work a really good look, right? Like maybe I'll go see it in person, maybe I'll sit in front of it for 15 minutes or half an hour, like really settle in. And then I won't let myself look at it again while I'm making the work. So I won't print out a picture of it and have it in my studio. I won't like repeatedly pull it up as a bookmark on my cell phone. I'll give it a good look, but then I'm only allowed to stay inspired by the parts that I remember. And our memories are so untrustworthy that, that inherently then gives me a ton of space between what I've made and the original work of art that's inspiring me. So, so that I think would be probably a helpful nugget of like, how does it eventually become your own so that you're not just always making a Cy Twombly?
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely helps.
Cool. And what step are you at again?
I just finished the travel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I find that to be, I think pleating has a lot of potential to be evocative of a Cy Twombly because of it. It's like that thin graphite pencil line.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've just finished that one, then you're coming up on manifestation. We talked about that quite a bit earlier. How's it going? Is there something and you don't necessarily have to share what it is if you don't want, but is there something rising to the surface that you might choose for that?
Well, I thought I had it, and then when I popped on and you guys were talking about, health and stuff, and then I thought, oh, because I have an issue there, and I thought, oh, okay, so now I don't know. So I know what I'm gonna do now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've made you more confused about which thing to do. That's wonderful. What was the thing you were originally thinking of, if you want to share?
To just like trust myself with my art and that my career will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And just trust that, it's going to happen as it happens, as it's meant to happen.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting one to try to think through how to represent it. Because that's not one that I've done. It's a little more challenging to try to think about. And is an idea coming up for anyone else around how that might be represent? And you can unmute if you want to, rather than just typing.
I'd say text or images that maybe inspire you, but just putting it out in the world so it can happen.
Yeah, Angie, do you want to share? Make sure you unmute.
The first image that came to my mind about that, when you think about trusting, was an empty vessel, because it really takes like an opening to allow that space to trust that it's going to be filled. And so the first image that came in my mind was just a line drawing of a bowl. And so, and it just kind of like Heidi's rabbit ears. It could be kind of, the hands is like kind of subtle in there. It's like part of the quilting almost. You could do like an embroidered line drawing of a bowl and just have it, in there. That was the first thing that popped into my head. So.
Yeah, I like that.
But that's a really hard one to do.
That reminds me of 2 years ago, Zoe Gladstone wanted to start working with memory quilts, and and, you know, and just selling her quilts, having a business. And so she made a representation of a small quilt and she put $1 in it and it was part of the quilt. And, you know, I know you've made a lot of wonderful small works that are like already available for sale. And so maybe even like making a small quilt and attaching it to this one, you know, like just so similar to like putting the actual money behind it, investing in that business. Like she just did such a beautiful version of that. And I think when I was asking people about the manifestation block a couple weeks ago, anyways, in my stories, I highlighted her comment about how she used the manifestation step for that. But like, I loved the actual physical inclusion of money. That was really neat. I think also, you know, a quilt that you intend to sell, you might treat differently or do things differently for it compared to a quilt that you intend to keep, or that, you know, you intend to have as, I'm trying to think who we were literally just talking to someone who's going to add a border so that it can purposefully be a lap quilt, right? So a quilt that you would sell, would that for sure have a sleeve on the back? Would that for sure have other kinds of details? Like the video that I did on finishing on the very last Scavenger Hunt quilt video, I talk a lot about different paths that you might make and ways that you would finish a quilt and let people understand what its fate is. So that could be kind of a fun video to fast forward to as you think about a manifestation block around selling and promoting your work. But just that idea of like preparing the quilt for sale, like, is there some kind of different energy that a quilt that's going to go out into the world to a stranger has compared to a quilt that's going to someone? And that could be an interesting way to approach the kind of imagery that you might use.
Right.
Yeah. Kim, you've got your hand raised. I bet you have something to share on this topic too.
I was just thinking about like trusting your art, putting it out there to be received, and the reciprocal nature of gift giving and like bartering or sales, or however we're representing that reciprocity. So like some sort of representation of your gifts that you're offering the world, and trust that there will be a reciprocity in the receiver. So I was imagining some sort of gift representation.
Oh, I love that, Kim. That reminds me, it must be one of my favorite books, because I think I've listened to the audiobook 8 times now, but Deepak Chopra's The 7 Laws of Spiritual Success you can listen to the audiobook on YouTube. It's like a YouTube video is just the audio of the book, and it's a very short book. And he talks about that same kind of idea, Kim, that we each have something really special within us to offer, to contribute to society. And that your thing that you have to give might be your art. And then when you look at it from that angle, rather than like, how can I get money or how can I sell? But like, how can I share something that's really powerful and helpful in the world? And you start to view it that way, it changes things tremendously. When I was doing this, maybe around 2016 or something, definitely still trying to grow my business, trying to picture how I might be sustainably making a living as a quilter, which was different from how I was managing to do it before. In yoga, there are a lot of mudras, and certainly you guys know that I love hand yoga, and I'm trained as a yoga therapist. So my teacher, Indu Aurora, has a book on mudras, which are hand gestures. And there's a hand gesture for wish granting. Maybe I even talked about that one in the previous Scavenger Hunt videos. I forget. But so it's a tricky.
I think the moon quilt.
Oh, that makes sense, that it was probably the Moon Improv quilt. Thank you for that. So this is the hand gesture for wish granting. It's like you crisscross and connect your fingers and you crisscross. So it's a very Anjali mudra is about matching the two sides of the brain, matching the sun side of your body and the moon side of your body. When you have them connected, that energetically as a mudra, it helps link right brain and left brain, giving and receiving, which is a powerful part of that. But here in the wish granting mudra, they're like very intimately intertwining the two sides, the giving and receiving, the wanting. And so this wish granting mudra, ideally you would practice it during the liminal space between waking and sleeping. So in the morning when you're still a little drowsy, you'd do this. And then at night before you go to sleep, you do this. And you want to picture, you want to hold the mudra and picture the thing as though you already have it in present tense. And for me, this did not work with the manifestation. Like when I was trying to picture like having a boyfriend, it made me very sad and was not a healthy mudra for me to do. So be thoughtful, feel into, does it feel helpful or does it not feel helpful? But it was very powerful and like worked right away with career things, which I found were just felt easier in general because they weren't the number one thing that I wanted. Which is funny, like because it was the secondary thing I wanted, it was much easier to get. But I would picture like, oh, there are people who would want to learn from me. Like, I was trying to picture a classroom of people eager to learn about quilting from me or eager to live their life with a work of art from me in their house. Like they would feel happy when they woke up and went in the living room and saw the quilt on the wall. They would, like just picturing all the different times and moments when someone would love to be around the thing that you have to give and to share, and thinking of it present moment. Like people would really enjoy quilting this way. I'm not the only one who likes to do, now it almost sounds funny now because I've realized that goal. And here we are in this beautiful space with people making this pattern. But at the time it felt like there were a lot of steps between me and where I wanted to be. And so that mudra was very helpful, and actively picturing that there were people who wanted that in the world was really helpful. So maybe even like an embroidery of that mudra, or if you were to try that mudra for a couple days and picture vividly, like maybe what you want is not like where is your quilt gonna go if it's not with you? Where is it? Like maybe you would embroider someone's living room with your quilt on the wall in their house. Like where is the home for your work? Because I know it can be easy to think about, like, I want it to not be at my house. But like, where is that location that it will be sold and loved and appreciated? And I think, people like Seth Godin speak really beautifully about finding your tribe. Who are your people? Who is your customer? Like, who is the person that wants your quilt, that will make a home for it, that will love it enough to pay a fair price for it, to be connected, to create that loop. So that could be a really fun angle for that one also. And hopefully a good microcosm example for the other things that we might want to be manifesting. I love that mudra and the way, but also be careful, because certain ones, it can just hurt too much to picture the thing that you want with that mudra that you don't have at the current moment. So see if it feels helpful with a grain of salt. And then if it does feel helpful, you can keep going for it. Because I've experienced it being helpful, and I've experienced it being like not helpful, and you'll know which one it is. Do those sound helpful, Rachel?
Oh
Like,
yeah, yes, thank you, everybody, thank you.
Yeah.
So all of that,
and we'll add Jessica too.
all of that made me think of the quote from Howard Thurman, where he says, don't ask what the world needs. Go and do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So I think if you go into, any project with a real sense of intention for kind of like what you're communicating and what you are hoping people can take away from, that interaction, because I don't come, this is like my first real quilting experience as well. I come from a background of visual art, and I always viewed my paintings as a conversation, and actually kind of like a series of conversations. There's a conversation that I'm having internally as it's percolating. There's the conversation that happens between me and the canvas as I'm creating it. And then there's the conversation that happens without me even present between whomever is viewing it, wherever it's hanging. And that's outside of me, so there also has to be this process of like letting it go and go into the world and do what it's going to do free of you. So just thoughts.
Oh, Jessica, I love that. Like, how do you, in that moment, infuse the quilt with selfhood that it can be enough all by itself without you standing next to it, describing it, continuing to own it. And that quote is so, so perfect. I love that. It can be fun to even put a quote secretly in a quilt. So you could write it with an acid-free pen, like I forget the brand that I like, but it's on my Amazon shop link thingy. But don't use a Sharpie marker. Like, apparently mice think that tastes like cotton candy. So, but with an acid-free marker, like you could write that on fabric and put it in a little envelope. Like, it doesn't.
I think that works. I think it's the Sakura. I think that works with the Sakura microns.
Yeah, the micron is it's some kind of micron. Yeah, if it says acid-free or archival, you're good. But that, that could be really potent to have a hidden, the same way that Zoe put that dollar in there, to have something that's hidden, that's still inside of the quilt rather than public for everybody to see. Jessica, thank you. That like seals that thought so beautifully. I've lost track of where we were in our conversation. Okay, I think that's some good banter back and forth. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Anyone else, especially if you haven't shared yet, want to share or ask or yeah, Beth.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you as well. This has been really what I needed, because rather like Caitlin, who's just left, I was really glad that she shared what she did, because that's exactly how I was feeling. And I kind of wanted to know where everything was going before I would commit to one thing. And this has really helped, and knowing I've really enjoyed listening to all the and that's what I like about this type of quilt, is all the thinking that goes on. I can be out for a walk, and I suddenly remembered that I had a book upstairs that years ago I used to write in little snitches of poetry or bits from novels, and I dug that out, and because I was struggling with the manifestation part. And I found a simple phrase, and it was Hans Christian Andersen, and he said, she would always be delighted. And I thought, well, that answers everything then. That'll do nicely.
Wow, that is beautiful.
There was another one, which was by Coleridge, the poet, and it was, for hope grew round me like a trailing vine. And I thought, I like that too. That would allow me to get some plants, kind of maybe be able to do a plant embroidery in there. So
I love when things double up that way, where you're like, it would be beautiful and
yes, useful.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you, Heidi. This has been so good. Thank you. Thank you for all
you're welcome.
Advice.
Yeah, would anyone else like to share? Oh, it's just been such a wonderful, fun conversation. I really appreciate everybody being here, and thank you for, I'm always so blown away that people are sharing their time and talent and money to, work on a pattern, and that you've trusted me enough to invest so much time and energy into an idea, and it's really meaningful to me. So I appreciate you guys being here and all of the energy that you're putting into the pattern, and love that you've been getting a lot out of it. So thank you for being so generous with the pattern and with your time and making it such a thoughtful, connected experience. Oh, and Lisa says you've got much to consider now. Mm-hmm. Who was that? I heard someone.
Oh, Julie, me.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. It's always wonderful to listen to everyone.
Agreed. And this was just such a wonderful size group too. I love that we were able to connect and talk to everybody and just get a full picture of where you guys are at.
Heidi, at the beginning, did you give us a little hint about your next pattern?
I did.
Did. What is it?
So now I think maybe it was Angie who mentioned a bowl. Like one of my versions of my new pattern has bowls just all over it, and a line drawing of a vessel. So that was kind of an amazing moment of you sharing that, and then me realizing that I had just put that all over a quilt. It is there's several elements of it that are still secret, but it's going to be very affordable and exciting quilt pattern, similar to the Scavenger Hunt in the sense that it has a whole cloth base and you're appliquing onto the surface of it. But all of the prompts are very small. The idea is that you would spend 15 minutes or so a day, every day for 30 days working on it. And that felt really good to me because I've been in such a space of thinking about diary quilts and memoir and storytelling, and especially that I made a 100 days quilt at the beginning of the pandemic, and that daily practice was so helpful for me. I suppose similar to the way that for 30 days, I made these small framed quilts in 2018, and that was also a really helpful experience of daily practice. And obviously there are cheat days, and if you want to go through it all in 2 days, you can do that too. But it's set up to be a daily practice and to have that feeling of memoir, and that maybe the diary entry is just, today I happen to like green a lot, or today I have more time, so I'm going to spend an hour on it instead of, or today I have very little time, so I'm only going to spend 5 minutes on it rather than 15. But hopefully it's poking around at some really fun topics as well. Certainly there are aspects that are sort of inspired but different from, what do you touch every day, but a different prompt, but that same kind of spirit. And it can be any size. One of the samples that I made is 5 by 5, and the other sample that I've made is 3 feet by 3 feet. And I'm not sure exactly when I'll be sharing the link and all the details, but I know that it's going to be live in July.
Okay, will you have a quilt-along for that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very hopeful that everyone will be sharing about it, and there'll be a hashtag and a great community supporting it on Instagram. And
great.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I've paired up with someone who shall not be named, who's going to be doing some like amazing filming and fanciness. So it won't be taking place in my living room in my pajamas like like the Scavenger Hunt videos did.
What about your calendar?
Sorry, what's that?
What about your calendar quilt? Are you filling in the middle of that, or?
I'm still debating. I didn't even take it with me to New York. I thought, like, let me just let it simmer a little bit. Naomi in New Zealand mentioned, like, what if I used white text to add some little details to things? So it wouldn't be so loud visually, but it would give you that storytelling feeling. It actually is really appropriate for what we were just talking about with artists inspiring our work. I have for a very, very, very long time been inspired by Deb Socolow. And it's kind of cool because I went to college with her at the same time as her, and I've like met up with her for drinks, and I know her, but I also am in awe of her. And I'm just pulling up her page. She is an artist in Chicago, and she went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And she just has this incredible storytelling aspect to her work. If you want to see her, this YouTube video from the art assignment, they do a stakeout, and it's very much in the spirit of her work, but she has kind of emphasized this quality that she has of being suspicious about things and wondering. And so she'll write on the work. She'll just cross something out if she changes her mind later. So you tell the theory to your struggling artist friend who works as an art museum guard. I think here she was really suspicious of, what's his name? Richard Serra. And one of my favorite pieces is in the permanent collection of the MCA in Chicago. And it was basically about the idea that there were pirates in Chicago. And so you just have the most wonderful time kind of slowly reading the piece and uncovering what happened. So now I've got the framework of the calendar, and I think I'm just trying to decide like how much and in what way, or is that another quilt? Like it could be a triptych or something. Like here you look at the quilt of the calendar, and then the next quilt is all of the different text about 2021 and what happened, trying to figure it out. So I guess too, I'm trying to decide, is it a series or is it one quilt? Where does it begin and end? Because I really do like the composition that I already have going on. I'll just share the recent photo of that quilt, since you asked, but not everybody necessarily knows what it's of. So it's this quilt is about 2021. This is January all the way to December. And you're balancing, allowing, like, it just kind of accidentally became that the days got so much bigger as they became closer to the present moment. And there are a couple different codes with thread color and visual color. These dark greens that are the same each month, those are the days that I was actively teaching and kind of on in that way. And then the other ones, the other colors are kind of just not to get bored and to be excited by the color palette. And then these weeks, these months, these 3 months, I didn't do any public teaching. This is kind of like a rest month, or just noticing the seasonality of the work that I do. So that's what I've got so far. I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts about, like, is the Deb Socolow inspired version the next quilt, or is it the same quilt?
I don't have a thought about that, but I want to say hi.
Oh, hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm on my lunch break at work. I just showed up 5 minutes ago. I just wanted to say hello. And I'm very behind on my scavenger hunt quilt. It started off very like at the dimension that you had us start off with, and then I fell behind, so I cut it. I just chopped it into a much more manageable
I love your
workspace for
soft
me.
color palette.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
That
So
neon
I
pink
just
just looks amazing in there.
thank you. As you can see, I accidentally cut right into this fabric here. So I'm just gonna stitch it up. But yeah, I just wanted to say hi. And even though I'm behind, I'm still with you guys.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
I'm glad you were
you.
able to join. We were kind
Me
of just
too, even for
winding
just a
down.
minute. I know, I just really wanted to say hi. So hello, everybody.
You. Yeah, we've had a really great conversation.
That's nice. Was it recorded?
Yes, it's recorded and it'll be on YouTube soon.
Cool. I will catch it.
Mhm. All right. But yeah, so that's what I'm pondering with this one is because I like I was saying, it takes a long time to make a quilt. And so by the time I'm done with my 365 circles, I'll know what to do. But apparently after like 30 hours of sewing applique, I don't quite know what to do next yet. So I've been working on some other projects and staring at that one. And I guess now I'm not so much of a monotasker. It's nice to have some quilting and other things that I need to do while I work out what my next move is there. But yeah, everyone, this is so wonderful to see you guys, and thank you. Any other last questions or thoughts? Okay, perfect. Look at us, so timely. 2:01. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for sharing and working on the pattern.